everybody, this is Dream, and we have a nice 11-game MLB slate for you on DraftKings and FanDuel. I have some core plays here on DraftKings: Vinny Pasquantino, James Outman, and Jack Silwinski. And then over on FanDuel, I have Pasquantino, Mullins, and Outman. So do keep those core plays in mind. Please smash that like and subscribe button. If you're on, before I get started, make sure to drop your comment below of your home run picks. We did have a home run call yesterday by King of Smack, who called Austin Riley. Please limit your home run calls to one player. Just keep that in mind. And also try not to double comment of a player that's already been picked. With that said, guys, let's go ahead and get started here. We're going to start with our pitchers here on DraftKings, and we're going to start with Spencer Strider, who's probably the top player on the slate when it comes to strikeouts. He started the year with 3 9-strikeout games, and his low on the season so far is 19 fantasy points, which is not terrible, and if he can get over 20 fantasy points on the slate, we'll be pretty happy with that. I don't necessarily think that it's a great slate for pitchers, but he's one of the better options, so I do think he's very viable here. Then we're going to look at some other options, and Clayton Kershaw is a good alternative to Spencer Strider, though he has a tougher matchup here. He hasn't had as many strikeouts as he normally does in a 3-game stretch, but he has some upside in the situation, being the third best K-rate guy on this particular slate. He just really hasn't had it so much so far this season. Then we're going to look at Logan Gilbert for Seattle. Now, he is a little bit of a risky play here against Milwaukee, but he's only given up a few earned runs so far in the first 3 games, and he's got a decent amount of strikeouts despite not being the biggest strikeout guy typically. He's cheaper than some of the other options, though, and that gives him some upside as a good P2 option. Another good P2 option is Stroman for Chicago. He's got the easiest matchup against Oakland here, and he started the season with a decently tough schedule, and he's managed to have 3 pretty decent games. I don't think he's necessarily going to be the best strikeout guy here, but he's a good. He has enough upside in this matchup to make him a good P2 option as a good, or even a good alternative if you just want to stay away from Strider and Kershaw. He would be a way to do that. Also, Jordan Montgomery. He's got some risk today in a tougher matchup against Arizona, and he's kind of streaky. He's a little bit streakier than Stroman is, but he does have some upside here, just a little bit more risky, especially being a little bit more expensive. I didn't include. I don't think that Blake Snell is a particularly good option today on this particular slate against Atlanta. His price does look okay here. He's a better player on FanDuel, where his price is way more reduced compared to all the other players. But he does have some upside here, but it's a little bit risky, and he actually had a negative fantasy point game against them the last time out. So do keep that in mind. He is in play, but he is pretty risky on the slate. Then at catcher, we're going to look at Adley Rutschman. Now, Adley has played really solid to start the season. He's hitting really good numbers. He has home run potential in this matchup. He's one of my favorite plays over $5,000 on the slate. There's actually not a ton of 5,000 plus guys that just jump off the page to me, but he is one of them, and he is definitely worth taking a look at. But if you want to save some money at catcher, one way you could do it would be Alejandro Kirk from Toronto. Now, he's a little bit risky today because he doesn't really feel like a home run is in the cards for him on this particular matchup, but he does have good hitting potential in this game. And then for a kind of a Hail Mary option, Ryan Jeffers from Minnesota. If he draws a start today, he started the season extremely well in the few games he's played, hitting the ball pretty solidly. He does have some kind of boomer bust home run potential as well, and so he's definitely worth taking a look here. In the first base, we're going to start with Vlad Guerrero Jr., but you could also take a look at Freddie Freeman. They're both in a very similar matchup scenario. I do think Vlad has a little bit more home run potential than Freddie has, but they both have good upside in this matchup. Then Vinny, who my favorite play at first base is Pasquantino from Kansas City. He's hitting the ball pretty solidly. He's got some home runs already this season. He's got a really good matchup here. He looks like he's a guy that's going to have good home run potential, and I really like his matchup in this situation. He's a little risky, but his price is cheap enough that makes him worth taking a look at. As for Brandon Belt, he's a good alternative if you just want to go Hail Mary at first base. He would be a way to do it. He's very high risk, very high reward kind of situation, but he's really risky. But if you want a Toronto stack, he would be a way to help you save some money at some other positions. Then we're going to look at second base and Ozzy Albies. Now Ozzy has some really good upside in this matchup, though it is a tough one. He's not a must play on the slate, but he has had some pretty good games lately, and he seems like he's hitting the ball pretty well. He's only had a couple of strikeouts the last few games, and so I do think he's got some good matchup potential in the situation despite the tough matchup. For Ketel Marte, he's also a high risk player on the slate and virtually the same price as Ozzy Albies. He's a good alternative here, though he's a little bit more boomer bust than he is. But if I was, my favorite play honestly at this position is Jawan Bay. Sorry if I'm butchering your name. But anyhow, he has some nice upside in the situation, and he's got a nice plus matchup here. He played really well yesterday as well, and Pittsburgh looks like they're primed to have another really solid game here. And he's done pretty well, including getting stolen bases, so he has some advantage on this slate. And then we're going to look at third base and start with Rafael Devers. Now, he's very expensive, but he does have the potential here. He is somewhat hard to roster today to his price, but he does have big-time upside, and so he's definitely worth taking a look at, especially with the home run potential. Austin Riley is a good alternative to him and a little bit cheaper. He's still also going to be hard to roster, but he's hit the ball really well, though this is a tougher matchup. He did manage a home run yesterday, and he's had 2 in the last 4 games, so he's definitely worth taking a look at. But the guy that I'm probably going to utilize at third base, and he wasn't a core play simply because there's just so many good options at third base, is Patrick Wisdom. Now, he is a little bit pricey at $4,500, and his price has come back up from his last few games, but he has some nice upside here, and he's had 5 home runs in the last 4 games, so he's definitely worth taking a look. He's seeing the ball extremely well, and so as long as he's doing that, then he's definitely worth a look against this subpar pitching. And actually, the metrics look almost as good today as they've looked at any of these games that he's played prior. At the shortstop position, we have 3 pretty decent options. I wouldn't say they're great options because there's not a ton of home run potential at shortstop normally. Von Grisham is a guy that's hit the ball pretty solidly to start the season, though he hasn't had any big breakout fantasy games, but he does have stolen base potential, and we know that from last year, and he does have some power, which is pretty good. It's just a matter of time before he can potentially hit a home run here. And this is a situation where he's not a must play, but he's definitely somebody to consider. And this position is kind of weak. Gunnar Henderson does have some upside here, though he isn't hitting the ball very well. When he does manage to get a hit, it tends to score some fantasy points, though, and so it is worth taking a look at. And he does have some home run potential, but he's kind of boomer bust. He's been somewhat risky, but a cheaper option that you could probably utilize as well is Anthony Volpe from the Yankees. He is really kind of dependent on starting at the front of the lineup, which he's done a couple of times in the last few games, and he definitely has some upside in that potential. He's also been getting stolen bases recently, which is definitely nice as well. If he can get on base, he's been getting walked too, which is also nice. So he definitely has some potential here. I'm not sure that he's going to be a guy that is a must play, but as far as these individual plays, these 3 guys are kind of high risk, high reward, but they're cheap enough that you can kind of mix and match them to fit in your lineup to get the other guys that you want. Into the outfield, we're going to start with James Outman. Now, I really do like Outman today for the Dodgers. He has some really nice upside if he draws a start. He's been playing pretty solidly. He doesn't start every game, as you can tell, because there's a lot of games where he just has 1 at bat. But when he does draw the start, he tends to have pretty good games, and I do like his upside here. He hits the ball pretty well, and these types of situations definitely make me like him. Then we're going to look at Mike Trout, who has some really big-time upside in this matchup against the Yankees. He's high risk, high reward, obviously due to his price, but he does have some utility here, and he's a good alternative to some of the other options when they're over $5,000, like Riley or Vlad Jr. or even Adley Rutschman. Then we're going to look at Bay again, who can also play here in the outfield. And if you wanted to get in Albies or Marte at second base, then he would definitely be a guy you could throw into outfield as well. I do think Pittsburgh looks pretty solid today, but like yesterday, be a little bit hesitant with Pittsburgh being in Colorado. It's not always the type of situation that it was yesterday, so I wouldn't necessarily stack a whole bunch of Pittsburgh guys, but there's a couple guys that are worth taking a look at. Alex Verdugo also looks pretty interesting here for DraftKings. His price is a little bit pricey, honestly, but he has some utility here, and if you pay down some other places, you could definitely give him a role. I feel like outfield is kind of rough today, which is somewhat unusual, so he is definitely worth taking a look at, though. Then we'll look at Jack Slowinski for Pittsburgh. Now, he's high risk, high reward, but he has some nice upside in this situation. He also played only one at-bat yesterday because he came off the bench and hit a home run. He's got that potential today. If he draws a start, he's actually done pretty solid when it comes to fantasy so far this season. Not a big-time play, but he's cheap enough that he can help you pay up for some other options. Kyle Garlick is also very interesting today for Minnesota. He's got some high-end upside on this situation, but he's kind of a Hail Mary play. He's high risk, high reward, and but the situation definitely gives him some utility. He's only played a couple games so far this season, but he's got a really good matchup here for his handiness. And then for Trey Mancini, he is a extreme boomer bust option. If he hits a home run, he's liable to score 20 plus fantasy points, but if he doesn't, then he's liable to get 0, and that's kind of the risk you have with him. He's the type of guy that can be in a top lineup if he pulls it off simply because his price is cheap. Alex Call also has an interesting situation here for Washington. He's a borderline Hail Mary call, but he's had some good games when he gets opportunities, and it looks like he should have some opportunity here. And so he's definitely worth taking a look at, but he's high risk, high reward again. And then Lars Nootbaar, he's a little bit more expensive, but he has some upside in this matchup. And while he's only played a couple of games so far this season, he's had some really good ones. Depending on where he draws a start, he would definitely be somebody that I would consider on this slate. So let's go ahead and move over to FanDuel now. And we got some really good plays here in FanDuel, but we'll go ahead and get started with our pitchers. Now, I really felt like the pricing here on FanDuel is a lot better, which definitely makes it so you can make a more honest lineup when it comes to paying up for some guys that you really like Cedric Mullins and stuff like that. And so obviously that's why Cedric Mullins is a core play. But ever in pitching here, I basically just have whittled it down to 2 options, and one of them being Spencer Strider. He's got big time upside here. He's getting a lot of strikeouts so far this season, and he's been playing pretty well. As long as he gets the strikeouts, a couple of earned runs won't even hurt him that much here, and that definitely gives him the biggest upside on the slate at this position. A good alternative here, because of his price, which I think I like him better here on FanDuel than I do on DraftKings, is Blake Snell. Against Atlanta is a tough matchup. He obviously had a pretty bad game against Atlanta the first time around, but he does tend to get some strikeouts, and if he can draw enough strikeouts, he can give up a couple earned runs here and still pay off here. He's also pretty cheap. At $7,400, he gives you a lot of room to mix and match players to fit whoever you want in your lineup, and so it's definitely worth taking a look at. Now, I will say that at the catcher and first base position, it's actually a little bit harder to roster our expensive guys like Freddie Freeman and Adley Rutschman and Vlad Jr. simply because they're a little bit pricey compared to what they probably ought to be, especially Rutschman. But as for those 3, I mean, Vlad Jr., he's got really big time home run potential here, as does Freddie Freeman. And then I like Adley Rutschman the best, but he's also the most pricey here. Makes him the hardest to roster on this particular slate in this position. But obviously, Vinny Pasquantino is a really great option. And you could also throw him into your utility play if you want to try to pay up for Adley or Freddie. You can definitely do that at this position. At second base, we are going to look at Ketel Marte. He's actually just way underpriced here. He's kind of a boomer bust situation, but he has high potential in this plus matchup, and so he's definitely worth taking a look at. Ozzy Albies is also very interesting here for Atlanta here, though he's a little bit risky due to his price and the fact that he's got a tougher matchup. He's definitely worth taking a look. And ironically, it's actually the hardest guy to roster is Bay for Pittsburgh on this particular slate here on FanDuel because he's priced higher than Albies and Marte, unlike on DraftKings where he's the cheapest version of those 3. So he is worth a look, but he is risky, especially with his price being higher. Rafael Devers is definitely a really good option on the slate, though he is extremely expensive, and that does make him hard to roster, especially when you have Austin Riley at almost $1,000 cheaper. He's definitely worth a look here. He's hitting the ball extremely well, and he's got some nice upside, and a good alternative, or not a great alternative, that was almost a core play for me here on FanDuel, if not for all the for Riley being cheap enough is Patrick Wisdom, who is just absolutely destroying the ball lately. He's had 5 home runs in 4 games, and so he definitely has some nice upside. As for the shortstop position, now we have a little bit better opportunities here on FanDuel than DraftKings, with Carlos Correa being just $2,900. He hasn't hit the ball particularly well, but when he has, he's had some big hits. The catch with this position, it really is that everybody kind of has that boomer bust potential here. Vaughn Grisham is kind of a low end upside guy here. He hasn't had a great start to the season when it comes to home runs, but he is hitting the ball well, and despite the fact he hasn't had a 10 fantasy point game yet on FanDuel, he has the potential here to do it. Gunnar Henderson is also very interesting as a potential guy here, though again he's kind of not hit the ball particularly well to start the season. He does have home run potential, and I also have another Hail Mary play here, and Donovan Solano from Minnesota. He hasn't hit a home run yet this season, but he's hitting really well, 340, though he hasn't been getting a ton of opportunities. He's gotten hits in almost every single game, but as you can see, the fantasy point-wise, he hasn't had very many games over 10 fantasy points, so it does make him a Hail Mary play, but he's also just $2,200, and he can help you pay up, especially if you use Strider in your lineup. And then in the outfield, we're going to look at James Outman. He just seems underpriced for this potential here. I really like the upside, and he's a great play on the slate. Mike Trout is interesting today for the Angels against the Yankees. I really like his upside in this matchup. He is very expensive, though, and somewhat hard to roster as a result. Aaron Judge also has good upside here on FanDuel, where he has some good home run potential. And then some decently priced options that aren't really available on DraftKings is Byron Buxton at $3,600. He definitely has some utility here. He's a little bit risky today due to the fact he isn't hitting the ball all that well, but he has home run potential. And then Siyu Suzuki for the Cubs. He has some nice upside in this matchup. He's only played a couple of games so far this season, but he has some good upside, and he does have home run potential, and so he's definitely worth taking a look at. Cedric Mullins also seems somewhat underpriced at $3,400, mostly because he hasn't hit the ball particularly great to start the season, but he's really been on a tear the last 5 games, getting hits in all of those games, and he looks like he's starting to roll. Not only that, but he's getting stolen bases, which really does give you some big boosts here on FanDuel, and he's just underpriced. Quite frankly, he's a great play on the slate. George Springer, also very interesting here for Toronto, has some really nice upside and has good potential in this matchup. And then we're going to look at Alex Verdugo for Boston. He has some really good utility here. He's hitting the ball extremely well. Kind of a boomer bust play when it comes to home runs, but he does really has some utility and nice upside here. And then Jack Sawinski for Pittsburgh. He has some really good opportunity here. He hit a home run yesterday, and I look for him to have some good upside in this matchup again today. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.